Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, or whatever time zone it is, whether you in the world, it is your Lore Saviour. And today we are going to be having a look at Talsorian Games' latest TTRPG, Shadowscar, which, to describe possibly badly, it is a well-researched blend of Japanese folklore, sci-fi espionage with a good level of dimension-hopping goodness for good measure, which is already painting a whole variety of images in your head so far. And that already sounds interesting to you, you can go and check out the Kickstarter, because when this video debuts, which is on the 1st of October 2025 in the year of our Lord Talos, it just started going through its whole crowdfunding Kickstarter campaign thing, so go and check that in the description below. You can also find out the quick start rules and a little adventure on Drive-Thru-RPG, and more information on Talsorian Games' website, all of which is going to be mentioned in the description below, so by all means, go and read that stuff whilst you're listening to this review. And before I carry on with this review, just a little bit of transparency and honesty, which is something that we like a lot on Lore by Night. I do my best not to keep information from you and lie to you unless I absolutely have to, and more often than not, it's never really a good thing. So regarding this game in Talsorian Games, I reached out to them some time ago, funny enough, asking for review copies of their Cyberpunk materials, because if you don't know, Talsorian Games are the Cyberpunk lot, so Cyberpunk 2020, Red, and it's those licenses that inspired Cyberpunk 2077, which then created the Edgerunners anime, which in turn inspired Talsorian Games to develop the Cyberpunk Edgerunners mission kit, all of which are fantastic things, and we're going to be having a closer look on the channel in the near future. I actually talked about the Edgerunners mission kit a couple of years ago now, actually a year ago as of the release of this video, where I told you a lot how to go about running it. That's going to be in a video up there for you to go and watch after this one. It's very important. So I reached out to Talsorian Games asking if I could have review copies of some upcoming materials, which were the more recent solo play rules that have just come out and is doing very well on Drive-Thru-RPG, and when this comes out, the Night City 2045 sourcebook. And Rob, who's like the community manager development person, reached back to me saying they were very happy to share that with me as and when, and they were also going to be sending me a bunch of other Cyberpunk materials, which is also really cool, and we're going to be having a look at all those when I get my hands on them, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But as part of that conversation, Rob asked me if I was interested in having a look at their upcoming TTRPG, Shadowscar. Now, I was vaguely aware of it because I sort of lurk around the Talsorian Games Discord, but I didn't actually know a great deal about it, and I was more than welcome and happy to open my mind's eye and just learn about the other materials that Talsorian Games are working on, and also some of the cool and upcoming things that are happening in the TTRPG space at the moment, which led on to Rob sending me a review copy of Shadowscar in PDF form. And I've read it, I've made some notes, and hopefully this review is going to help you to see whether this is the game for you. And a couple of other little things I have to mention. This is like a beta review copy, so do expect some things to change. Like, don't take everything I'm saying as gospel, which you really shouldn't be doing anyway, because this is just my opinion, and it should help to whether to see something that is okay for you and to do further research if you're interested, or you think it's a load of shit and just try and work out what the fuck I'm going on about. So, just to be clear, this is a review copy. It's still going through some changes, so don't expect everything I'm saying to be final. You know, some changes can be made. So without further ado, I think we should have a little look at the book in question. So a good place to start with anything is at the beginning, which has a start with the digital book itself, which has a start talking about the overall presentation, I think. And I do think it's worth mentioning that it is very anime inspired, which some people might find a little bit painful, because I know that the whole anime aesthetic does have certain connotations, shall we say, for good and for bad. And there's the more bad side that I'm just sort of like airing the caution with, like some people have a certain smutty, perverted relationship, and that's not the case here at all. This has a very shonen focus for the most part, and by which I mean it's very action focused. It's like heroes fighting bad guys sort of thing, but as I said, there's a more interesting blend of sci-fi and Japanese folklore in there, so there's a whole range of different styles and emotions covered through all these different pieces. And with the thing that Talsorian Games does that's really cool is that they credit each piece to this specific artist in like a little corner somewhere, which is kind of bad because there are some pieces that I find really unpleasant, and I don't like the fact that I can just pinpoint, okay, I don't like your style, ew, stinky. But it's cool that they credit their artists so upfront, and it just doesn't leave it to guesswork for people who are interested in that sort of thing. Like, wow, I really like this. Who did that sort of thing? And then trying to work out whose little signature is in the bottom corner. You know, I really like that. And also with the PDFs, our Talsorian game provides image descriptions that you hover over the mouse on desktop at least, and it just gives you the description of the art piece in question, which I think is really fucking cool. Our Talsorian Games have always been a little bit ahead of the curve about that sort of thing, and I wish that a lot more companies would do this, just so that more people could like access and play your games. And it's also rather nice because you don't just have to create like a bland, bare bones version of your product that's completely devoid of all character, basically a fucking text document, which some companies do, which is good but rare in of itself. But it's nice that our Talsorian Games have actually managed to do their research and work out how to actually implement this so that your game is more accessible to people. And that's also reflected with the sort of font choices. They're very clear, they're rounded, they're modern. Like some of the subheadings and titles and things have like the sort of like jagged, indented sort of approach, by which I mean it's very rounded, but like little corners and things are notched off, and I'm looking over there because I've got the PDF open here for reference. So it's very easy to read all the same, but it still has a nice style too. That's so they found the middle point between making something cool and flashy and easy to read, because more often than not, the game companies just choose the thing that looks cool and then don't really give much thought about how fucking accessible and readable it is. It's actually something I've criticised a lot with Onyx Path Publishing, which with their World of Darkness product and some of their more original properties, they put out like little letters and Reddit forums and the like, just to try and make things look authentic and nice. But sometimes, particularly the letters they do, it's all like fancy handwriting and you can't fucking read them. So it's really cool that our Talsorian Games have managed to find that middle point and make it work so well, which kind of leads me on to the next point regarding the writing team. There are two writers of this whole project, which is about just under 300 pages. We have Cody Pondsmith, who is the son of Mike Pondsmith, who is the creator of the Cyberpunk stuff, and James Hutt, whose work beyond this I'm not too sure about. And I'm sure for some people, they're going to see this, that they're two American guys, one of them's white, one of them's black, neither of which are Japanese, and it might just raise a little red flag, because there are many instances in the TTRPG sphere where you've had predominantly white male authors who have presented written works and materials about Asian cultures and just painted them in a very silly anime weeaboo sort of orientalism, which is a word I can never pronounce properly, aesthetic, and it just does a lot of harm to the setting, the people that you're trying to depict, thus culturally appropriating them. And I feel that people are going to go into this not seeing this review or doing their research or understanding about our Talsorian Games and just put this aside because, okay, this is just a couple of guys doing something that's very weeby anime sort of, you know, cringe, which unfortunately I can understand the mindset, and I can also understand the mindset that not a lot of people are going to be playing this because it's so Japanese focused that you actually start reading it and there's a very interesting blend of the folklore, which I will talk about. This is all presentation stuff at the moment, and feel that they're just going to be cut off because it's not for them, because it's not representing them, forgetting that we play TTRPGs to experience different ideas, cultures, stories, ideas, emotions, and to have fun ultimately at the end of it. And you don't necessarily have to be someone who is Japanese, because that isn't the sole identity of the game. Yes, it makes up a huge footwork of it, but as we'll soon explore, there's a lot more culture to explore. But regarding the writing element of it, when I saw the two authors there, I know that our Talsorian Games do a lot of work regarding their cultural and sensitivity readers and the like, and they do their research. It's very clear if you've read some of the older Cyberpunk stuff, just how much work and effort they put into things, and how much is that carried over into Cyberpunk 2077, the video game, because CD Projekt Red and our Talsorian were working quite closely together, and CD Projekt Red ultimately do care about the setting and about recreating it as authentically as possible. So I did a little bit of my research regarding some of the team here, and one of its editors is, I'm going to butcher your name and I'm really sorry, and that's another little warning with this. There's a lot of Japanese names and the like here, and I'm going to mispronounce them, so do not get your fucking knickers in a twist if I pronounce a certain name wrong. I'm doing my best here. But one of the editors is an Emma Yasui, Yasui. I was vaguely with some of the other people on there, but Emma I was not. I did a bit of research, and Emma is a Canadian-Japanese editor, advertised as a pop culture and disappora, which again can't pronounce properly. So basically what that means is that she's very strongly connected to her Japanese heritage, lineage, whatever's the correct wordage here, and you go through some of her portfolio and it's very clear that she's, to distill it badly, a sensitivity reader regarding these sort of cultural themes. But the thing that I really like about this is that she's included here as an editor rather than just a sensitivity reader, because another issue that you have with a lot of these things, that they have a cultural sensitivity reader or something like that, they have their own theme, which is great, but more often than not it just feels like we're including this person here because it shows that we've done the good thing and we're doing the little whole tick box thing for the perpetually online TTRPG liberals, which I'm making a point of because I've criticised a handful of World of Darkness and White Wolf products that have made this blunder. At least I feel it's a bit of a blunder, but that's a conversation for a different time, and I've covered it elsewhere. But I'm highlighting all of this just to make it clear and showcasing that Talsorian Games, even though the main writing team are two American guys, neither of which, to my immediate knowledge, have any immediate connection to Japanese culture, besides the fact that Cody has very clearly been working on this for a very long time. I've been told by Rob that he's been working on this since he was fucking 9 or something, so there's a lot of love that's been gone into this, and clearly he knows his stuff, but there's a difference between knowing your stuff and perhaps going out there or living there for a little bit, and then comparing it to somebody who has been born and raised and actually has that heritage to lean on. So basically, long story short, good job Talsorian Games for doing something that quite a lot of companies and individuals just can't be asked to do. So once again, I feel that you're ahead of the curve. Now, I'm also not going to be so naive enough to assume that everything that's being presented in here is all tickety-boo. As I've mentioned before, I am not Japanese, I'm British, I've never been to Japan. My only real experience of Japanese culture is through some TV shows, some films, the very surface level things. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they have one or perhaps two people, because I don't know the history of everybody else in the editing and the writing team, that there are some things that are going to be offensive or misrepresented or incorrect or whatever. But the fact is that it feels that they've gone to their lengths to highlight the importance of the people on the team. Like Emma, being part of the editing team, is able to have a lot more influence and input with the writing than just being somebody who reads things and give a seal of approval and offer advice. The editing has a bit more of a larger role, traditionally speaking. So again, take everything I'm saying with a pinch of salt, read it, make your own decisions when it comes out, of course, and hopefully you can have a lot of fun with it. But again, big old fucking tangent waffle, but I think it's important to highlight this shit all the same. But regarding the rest of the book's presentation, something else that makes it quite accessible and easy to read, I think, is the fact that each chapter is color-coded. I'm looking at the contents page and that sort of thing. It's a very bright royal blue. Going to the introduction, it's sort of that same sort of color. Moving on to the first chapter, which is labelled as the second chapter because you've got the introduction, because it's a bit of a confusing thing. We've got purple, red, yellow, green, etc. and so forth. So it makes it very clear and distinct when you're flicking through the book, either as a PDF or then as a physical book sometime in the near future, what chapter goes with what, and should be able to help you remember the sort of bits and pieces that's within that book. However, on PDF, it's a bit garish and I don't like it. I will say that, as I've mentioned before, I don't particularly like doing reviews and reading and absorbing information from PDFs, which is one of the biggest troubles that I've had with this, because it's a big ass book and I ended up skim reading bits of this because it was just too much for me to try and endure, and I will talk about those bits later on. And I imagine being in a physical format, it will be a lot easier to read, and I could adjust with the brightness settings and whatnot, but I shouldn't have to do that just to accommodate for my specific needs, and it's not really that big of a deal, and it's a very subjective one, so it might be very useful for some people because they're very bright and clear, distinct colours, which again, I imagine for some visually impaired people, having those bright colours might be able to help differentiate things. I don't really know, but I like the fact that they're very clear and pronounced, so it's just easy to work out which one is which. It's just a bit too bright and bold in PDF digital form for my own taste. Another little weird gripe is that I have that a bit later on in the book that you have like some maps of different parts of the world, the real world, which again I'll talk about in a moment. It's in chapter 6, and it has like a little key like saying which bit is which, like different bases and bits and pieces relating to the game. They're sort of all over the place, like a weird scattergun approach. Like you've got like a 14, 3, 20, not exact numbers, but you like it's that sort of scattergun approach, and it would just, to me, would have been a lot easier that if you're reading it through, like you have like 1, 2, 3, like you're reading it like a book, which would help you just to point out the little key of what those different pieces are. This is actually something that happens quite a fair amount in Cyberpunk Red, and it's something that I'll highlight a couple of times. There's actually a lot of similarities between the presentation between Cyberpunk Red and Shadow Sky here. In fact, the main font body face that I forgot to mention earlier on is pretty similar, if not identical, to Cyberpunk Red, and I feel that whilst that association is good, because those who are coming from Cyberpunk, who are wanting to try this new game, are going to feel a little bit at home because like there's some of those visual clues that it's been done by the same company. It can sort of muddy the lines a little bit, and there's one very specific example where I feel this is very obvious, but I'll get to that because it's like happening much later in the book. The first proper chapter of the book is not labelled Chapter 1, which I've mentioned caused a little bit of confusion later on. It is the introduction, which is called Welcome to the Agency, which is really a chapter of 2 parts. The first part is this big old history lesson, and the second part is basically how to play the game. It starts with the tragedy and the conflict between Izanagi and Izanami, which if you're a Persona 4 fan, those things might sound a little familiar to you, which I'm only going to highlight because as a Persona fan and weeb myself, it would be remiss of me not to give passing mention to that. But, you know, that jank aside, it is a very tragic tale, as is a lot of ancient Japanese history, and actually a lot more modern stuff is as well, and that's reflected a lot more in the music and the art and all those other bits and pieces as well. But it's delivered in such a way where it's very clear that there is tragedy and there's conflict there, but it's done in a in-character explanation, like a mentor to a pupil as you are going to be entering this sort of one of these clans of ninjas essentially, and it makes it easy and accessible to understand, and it doesn't feel too overwhelming, although I can imagine there will be quite a few people who start reading this and feel, oh shit, do I need to study ancient Japanese history to properly appreciate the setting, which opens up another minefield about how much research is necessary to do something like this. I'm of the opinion that you can do as much or as little as you want, providing that you're having fun with it. What's presented in this introduction is absolutely fine just to get you off the ground, just to know where the characters are coming from and the characters that you'll be playing as, of course. That being said, the way that it wraps up this little history section, I feel was a little rushed, and it kind of has, oh shit, we're running out of the word count here, we need to wrap this up as quickly as possible, because it very hurriedly tells you that you are a member of the Shadow Sky Agency, which is an order of shinobi, which are basically ninja, assassin, spy sort of things, to hunt yokai, which is a Japanese word meaning spirit or demon, I believe. You can go and do your own research, but it's like bad spirits, essentially. You're going to hunt yokai infected worlds, which is a whole process known as the Veil War, which kind of alludes to some of the espionage that comes in there. That it's all done in secret. The one side cannot know about the other exists, sort of thing. And those that portray the agency are known as Nukanin. Again, I'm going to get some of these words wrong, and I wish they could have just expanded on that just a little bit so it didn't feel so rushed. Yes, we get a much fuller explanation about all of that and the history with actual years when certain things happen, and that's a lot more engaging then, albeit a lot more dry, which I'll mention when I get to it. But it'd be nice if it wasn't so rushed in the beginning when you're trying to set the tone and the seriousness about what you're wanting to do. Even if that's not saying that it shouldn't have been a short bit, but when I read it, it did feel incredibly rushed. I feel there could have been a lot more honour in the writing style about that you're taking up like this noble cause, and it's all down to you, you know, not to fuck up, essentially, that if you fail, the whole world is going, well, the world's actually, because it's multi-dimensional, are going to be in ruin. But I could have read it wrong, but that was like, when I got to that, just felt, okay, we're just going to end it here. Okay, fair enough. As it's rather good actually that it is expanded later on. That would have left a much more sour taste in my mouth. As for the other half of the chapter, it's the sort of what is a game, what's a game's master, which is called a storyteller here, which is funny being a World of Darkness centric channel. What are players, what are their roles, which I think is something that isn't really explored enough in TTRPGs, especially more modern ones these days, which I find just a little bit baffling. And it's all done in a very friendly writing style, in like a friend talking to another, and the bits of it that actually are referred to in the first person, like Cody or the other guy whose name I've already forgotten is like talking to you directly, which I think is a really sweet way of doing things. So it's sort of like, if you're feeling a bit tense or anxious from reading all that history before, it's like, it's okay, you know, this is what we do, this is how things are going to roll. Pun not intended, being dice. And it's also got a really simple dice system as well. It's a pooled D6 system, which means that it uses 6-sided dice. And it being a pooled system, you take an attribute and a skill, you add those numbers together, and then you roll the number of dice equaling to that. So if you add an attribute and skill, and let's say it comes with 5, you roll 5d6. And you're looking for 4 and 5s, which are successes, and then 6s are worth 2 successes. Interestingly, there isn't like a botch equivalent, like rolling a 1 like takes away a success. Like, I'm surprised there isn't one of those, probably because there is another mechanic that gives you a real slap in the face, mechanically speaking, which is also really cool because I'm a masochist, but also because it actually ties in a lot more with some of the game's themes of spirits and giving and take and this concept of balance. And it's awesome when game companies actually deliver with the mechanics to meet with the themes that they're trying to go with. I've just described that horribly, but hopefully when I describe the mechanic in question, it makes a bit more sense. Characters have something known as an inu, which is basically what I've described. It's this relationship between oneself, the spirit self, nature, and harmony, like wanting to keep in a balance, kind of like a yin-yang sort of thing, but there's a lot more nuanced than that, I feel. And then again, yin and yang is kind of nuanced in of itself, but it's a very spiritual thing. There's a lot of spiritual relationship stuff that happens here, and respecting the space around you. And how that works is that you have this little box on your character sheet, and you use it for one of two things. You can gain 1 success on a check, but only if you're 1 shy away from getting a full success. So say if the difficulty value, or DV, is 3, and you've only got 2, you could spend that to gain those 3 successes. Or you can use it in combat to deal 3 points of damage to what it is that you're fighting, which is quite a lot, honestly. But once that's been marked off, i.e. you've used it, you then can't use it again until the storyteller uses it on you. So the storyteller could use it to remove a success from you, or they can use it to deal 3 damage to you. And they have to do that so it allows you to use that again, which I feel really greatly represents the theme it's trying to go with here. It's a really simple idea, and I just love how simple it is. Like, it doesn't have to be too complicated. It doesn't need like a variety of dice rolls, like for, I don't know, I feel some games would treat this as like, okay, you have to spend like a turn meditating using specific like hand gestures, which do actually come up here in terms of the combat, and there are little diagrams that are shown with that as well, like different they're done with like prayer, meditation, and then mantras associated with them, and each one has a correlation with the different chakras, which oddly enough is not explained here. They're just, it's cool because you get a bit of a history lesson there, and it doesn't feel like it's included there just to be culturally appropriative. Oh, that's something that ninjas do, like they do like the little like hand signal sort of things. Like, no, you're actually told how to use them a little bit and like engage that with the role playing here. I just feel that could have been expanded a bit more, probably because the idea of chakras and healings and mantra has a sort of like new age spiritual mumbo jumbo vibe that a lot of people won't vibe with. But I suppose that goes back to what I was saying earlier on, that there's some bits that could have been filled out and expanded for that are not totally correct. So, you know, it's not perfect by any means. But anyway, just going back to what I was saying about the Inu thing, like a lot of companies would have like padded this out with like meditation roles and like including something like this, that you would have to like do the symbol or whatever, or use the specific symbol, and you'd have to learn and memorize things. It's kind of a convoluted example, but again, they've done the whole KISS idea. Keep it simple, silly, or stupid, depending on your outlook on life. Opposed checks are really simple as well. because some companies do the whole, you've both got to look for successes, but one of them's got the higher one, etc. and so forth. But no, this is quite simply, if you get more successes than your opponent, you win, and any results that are halved, you round them up. And modifiers are done by subtracting or adding dice. It's really simple. There's not too much math involved. You don't have to remember things like you're rolling 4 dice and then you have to add whatever successes you get. Like, you physically add the number of dice. It also makes it more fun as well. Just rolling more dice is always more fun. However, this chapter really needs a fucking lexicon, because it throws so many terms and vocabulary at you and other bits of Japanese folklore and the like that I was constantly having to flick pages backwards in the book to try and remember what different bits and pieces were, and that does feel a little overwhelming, and I feel it could really use something like that so we can just have everything in one place so we know what things are, so we don't have to feel that we have to remember everything. We can just refer to what's in the textbook. Chapter 2 is called Character, so this is the character creation chapter, but it's so much more than just putting down the stats for your characters. It talks about the different shinobi clans, it talks about the formation and the types of your strike teams, which is the name given to your group of shinobi, ninja, clans, etc. So basically a group of you are put together for a purpose and you go off and do your missions. There's a little bit of creation to do with that. Like, there's a few tables further down the line, like reminiscent to the life path stuff of cyberpunk games, where it talks about like the formation of your strike teams, like your first mission. There's your handler, which is like a own dedicated spirit thing, the sort of thing they want, the relationship that they have with the group. There's even just a really simple one, just like the naming structure of that, which I think is all really cool. It really makes the whole process a lot more personal rather than just the in-game word for the group of players that come about doing their thing. There's also some base mechanics as well to that. Not too much, it's not like a fortifying base and upholding things. There's a couple of things bits in here about that, but it makes, again, feels everything really homely and personal to the characters to make them care about more about each other, the strike team, and also where they're based in this headquarters. It kind of does have like a late 80s, early 90s sort of like Saturday cartoon morning vibe sort of thing, where you could break up the role play of like all the social hub stuff of like characters living out their lives, which is something that is mentioned only a little bit here, but it's more focused on the actual action stuff is where most of the role play is going to be happening. I feel it's a nice little vibe, and something I forgot to mention earlier on regarding the artwork. Some of the artwork does have like a sort of like a grainy VHS filter through. I notice it more with the front cover, whilst everything else is kind of more modern, so it's sort of like covering a whole different spectrums of those anime vibes a lot more. But going back to chapter 2, the way that it actually starts is it's almost a page talking about session 0, which for a lot of people is one of the many safety tools where everybody comes together and talks about what is and isn't okay. Now, to me and some others, session 0 isn't of itself a safety tool, it's just the name that's given to that moment where we talk about what is and isn't okay, or to some, what to or not to expect. And I'm wording it as such because different people have different methods of doing things. Some people have like the X card and like different consent sheets. Some people have a chat. Some people like, anything fucking goes. If you don't want to get upset or whatever, just go and do something else. I'm just highlighting that because different folks are different strokes. But obviously we're talking about session 0. It talks about what it is, basically the things that I've just highlighted here. But I am a little surprised that there isn't any mentioning of any safety tools and the like. Not because I demand that companies do this, but I just assume that's just something that a lot of game companies talk about now, even in brief passing. There's just nothing about consent sheets or the X card. I don't know how that's going to make them look, because some people may just see that and think, oh, there's nothing on consent here, they're bad people, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think that's the case at all. It's actually a little refreshing that we don't get another instance of TTRPG companies telling us what is and isn't okay, which is different from when I did my review of The Walking Dead, where they had that example, and that to me felt like they were just doing it as a tick box exercise. Here, I think they go through enough here about having an open conversation about what is and isn't okay with the things that should or should not be explored, and also highlighting some of the more political and racial charged elements of this game as well, which I'm very glad that it does address, particularly with some of its setting pieces, which we'll talk more about later on, that it just makes it clear up front, just to make sure how much of that is and isn't okay for your own personal group, so nobody feels they're going to be too intimidated by things. And then after that, you get the different tables of like establishing some of your base, your handler, which is the one that like sets you off on the missions of the spirit entity person that I mentioned. One thing I would have liked with the handler prompts, for the most part, they're all positive. I mean, there's kind of like they're searching for power, which can be twisted, but there's like none that are inherently negative. Like some have got like antagonistic motive sort of thing. They all seem to be very positive, and I would have liked to have seen some of them that make them a bit more sinister, that they're like using the strike team for their own goals. One very upfront that they've got some ulterior motive rather than you can have to twist things here and there for that. Now, of course, as this is a beta review copy, that may change by the time that we get the full product. But at the moment, that's just something I would have liked to have seen, and partly because I'm a spiteful games master, I love like twisting the emotional trauma on the player characters, not the players. There is a difference. And I also think that it's called like the first mission generator that you have. This can easily be adapted into like generating missions for the characters. There are some tools later on in the book, I believe, that allow you to like generate missions and the sort of things that send your players through the different dimensions. But if you want something that's a bit more straightforward and upfront, you can use these tables here to come up with some ideas. I also think it's a really neat little thing that you could do for solo play if that's the sort of thing that you want to do. As of the release of this video, there aren't official solo rules for this yet, but given how simple and straightforward the game is, and a huge ass bestiary you have further on, and all the bits of information that you need, you could twist and turn things to make this a fairly apt solo game. Now, have I done it yet? No, but I have a lot of experience with solo RPGs that I have a pretty good eye for what makes things easily adaptable for the solo play format within the simple dice themes, the tables, there's a lot of them, the life path stuff that happens as well. All really straightforward and simple stuff, including the characterization stuff. It's broken down in a really simple format, and this is actually where we get to hear a bit more about the homelands that your character comes from, which is going to affect some the magic and the skills that they have, and also some of the roleplay elements as well. You've got 4, but there's a lot more out there because it goes for like a whole multiverse sort of aspect sort of thing, and it's described as a multiverse later on, and I just sort of cringed a little bit just because how the concept of the multiverse has been done to death at this point, and how much of a marketing tool it is. But I understand describing it as a multiverse just to understand that everything's all connected together, something that's described as the mosaic, which gives it a far more artistic and spiritual and, dare say, religious form and appreciation with it. It also gets very political very quickly, which I absolutely love, because politics is a really great thing to engage and converse with, contrary to popular belief, and politics is so embedded with art that it's very difficult to separate the two, and it's really from this point onwards that some of those political tensions start to seep through a little bit, and you immediately see that when you're having a look at the 4 homelands that your character is going to be a part of, well, one of these 4 anyway. You don't be a member of all of them. You choose one of them, and then there are 3 homeland abilities, and you choose one of them. And there are other bits and pieces to expand upon that, but just to go through them in brief, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, the first one, Nakata Sakuni, which is the ancient Japanese-inspired one. You have the Steel Court, which is very much inspired by Victorian England, and that has all the fun colonialism that comes with that, and I say that sarcastically, do not take that out of fucking context. And the art style I really like here, because it borderlines a sort of Professor Layton sort of aesthetic, pinched in with a bit of Howl's Moving Castle of Studio Ghibli. You've got this big old robot carrying something, you've got like this car with steam, like these tentacles going on, like pulling something out of the docks, across the Tower Bridge, and Big Bend in the background. Absolutely love that, partly because I just love the scene that's going on, and the influences that Bad Moon Art Studio, who's done the art for these sections here, has drawn from that. But also, so often in TTRPGs, themes tend to be very America focused, so as a Brit, it's just so nice to see something that's a bit closer to home. Unfortunately, it's focused on the more negative aspects of things, but you know what? I'm not to shy away from the fact that the UK is quite frankly a fucking awful place, and historically has been since its inception. But the third homeland is 5th Street, which is essentially 90s, 20s noir America, with all the racism and segregation that comes with that. And then you have Refuge, which is like the cyberpunk sci-fi focused one, because of course our Talsorian Games had to include a sci-fi cyberpunk setting within a sci-fi game. Like, they just could not help themselves here. But I suppose that makes things a bit easier for those who are within their fan base who are just used to playing Cyberpunk, that they have a bit more familiarity here, including fucking catgirls. One of the things I really like about this section is the presentation of the art pieces themselves. Like, it has the same character, but they're dressed differently to better suit the environment. Like, for the first one, you have this guy with like the blue bandana. It's like a little art motif just to connect, oh, it's that guy. Or woman, we don't actually know because we don't actually see their face. Which again, I rather like. It's not male or female, we can just make assumptions and inject our own personalities and ideas and perceptions onto that, which is really neat. But with the first one, Nakasakuni, or whatever it's called, you've got the guy with like a blue bandana motif, like sitting in front of this village, and there's a big old purple life tree with a load of spirits and sunlight. It's all very cool stuff. We're still caught. He's like tucked away in the corner. You can't really see him properly, but you see that you've got the little blue banner that's poking through Fifth Street. He takes up most of the site there, like wearing a hat, and you can see that he's got his long hair. And then Refuge again, he's tucked away in the corner with some more futuristic clothes with the blue bandana. And it's really when we get on to the next bit, talking about the life path, where things get really political. Like, it's very clear that, you know, it's a real important feature of this game that, you know, you're mixing and interacting with different people from different parts of the world with different cultures, and part of this game is respecting the veil, i.e. the different cultures and perceptions of things, so you don't piss people off and you don't upset people and you don't cause more unrest than need be, which I don't think needs to be fucking included a lot of the time, but unfortunately we are living in some pretty wank times, so I'm really glad that it highlights that, and this sort of racial, political tension is very much a core focus of this game. It's great, and it's also a core feature of a lot of anime stuff as well, especially with more espionage cop-focused stuff, which, again, it just shows a huge understanding of things that's going on in the world. And to be quite blunt about it, Cody is someone of colour, so they have lived through a lot of this. So I think a lot of this just comes through second fucking nature. If it wasn't that, I'm sure there would have been things inherited from his fucking dad. But yeah, it's really cool stuff, and I like the life path stuff. You've got like birth regions, family, relationships and their complications, like all sorts of things in childhood environments, important life events, and other things I'm not going to spoil for you, but it's awesome things that you can use to pad out your own characters. Games Master could use this to pad out like NPCs, and of course, if you're doing things as a solo player, you've got loads of these tools to do loads of really cool shit with as well. However, one thing I find a little bit annoying regarding this chapter is that from this point onwards to the end of the chapter, there is going to be plenty of page turning back and forth from previous chapters. So when you're going further down the line, you're signing like gear and more information about the Shinobi Can. You're going to have to go back to the previous chapter. Okay, I've done this bit now. Now I have to go to this chapter. Back again, now that chapter, etc. and so forth, and I find that really fucking frustrating. Cyberpunk Red, funny enough, has this issue, and it's a lot more annoying there because it has a much more complicated character creation process, or one that's more time consuming than Shadow Scar. It is a really fucking straightforward system here. But beyond that, it's just a fucking chore, and with a PDF as well, there's like a lot of mouse scrolling. At least with a physical book, I won't have that issue where I could just like put a bookmark in something and like grab a word and go boom, there we go, have another word, boom. And it being color coded is also helpful in that regard as well, but it is not fun sitting there just scrolling up and down with a mouse all the time trying to find that exact thing that you're looking for. Sure, you can control F it, but that's also really fucking annoying. One of the things I really like about the character creation process is the quirk section, which are like pros and cons that make your character a bit more unique, and their mechanics associated to each of them, and you choose two, so basically one from each. But the one that I really like the most, and I'm hoping that Talsorian Games don't change this, and I don't get any shit for reading this one verbatim, you have an androgynous advantage, which you never take penalties on disguise checks to pose on a different sex. Basically, it's a really simple way of saying trans rights are human rights, and quite frankly, if you've got a problem with that, what the fuck are you doing playing fucking Talsorian Games? And what the fuck are you doing on this channel anyway? Like, really simple little thing. Love it. But the way the chapter ends is talking about the 6 shinobi clans that your character is going to be a part of. And I don't know why. Maybe it was because I had spent like a good few hours reading this already without breaks, but I found it very difficult to work out like what made each of the clans unique other than its artwork and some of the abilities that they have. Like, how would I summarize each of them? Which ones could I like latch onto with a simple character concept, or the other way round sort of thing? I just found that a bit difficult, and I feel a lot that assuming that it's as difficult as I am making it out to be, I feel that some players are not going to have the patience to try and dissect things, and I feel that a summary little box to sum these things up would have been a lot easier. In fact, a little summary box as a whole, just to break everything down really basically, and then you could have the fuller chapter to describe everything fully, would have been useful here. So, just take a bit more influence on the White Wolf stuff here. But to go through the 6 clans that I'm going to butcher in their pronunciation, so we can have a giggle at that in the comments below. The Arashi are ruthless, tight-knit family fighters that will win whatever it takes. You have the Futsumashi, who fight to protect rather than kill, keeping balance to the world. The Habana, which are all about tradition, honor, and glory for the shinobi, and they use poisons and the like. The Kurumaku, who are a newer order that has an ideal cop/spy energy. The Tanati, or the Tante, are the oldest of the shinobi clans. Violence for them is the last resort, using stealth and acrobatics, disguising the yokai at times too. And there is a mechanic for that as well. It's not unique to them. Like, they're these sort of masks things that you can take onto. Oh, that's the mask that you can take on the appearance of others, and yokai, and you can wear them as well. And some of the skills and abilities regarding the Tante are focused around that. And then finally you have the Wanami, which are yokai hunters exploiting and targeting their weaknesses, and they control nature. It's a very interesting mix there. Chapter 3 is Improvement, which is basically how your character gains in ranks and how they can lose it as well, and also increasing of like your different skills and abilities. So how it works is that you choose one to improve at the end of each session, which really a good storyteller should limit what a player should earn just by the basis of what they're doing. Like, if they're not using guns and they want to improve their guns, they shouldn't do it unless there's a good like RP reason for that, or to be meta about it, like there's had to be like a reason as to why that is. And it wouldn't be a Pondsmith game if there wasn't some level of wealth and resource management in there as well. Because, yeah, you can buy things and you have to upkeep things. And when you gain ranks, you gain different abilities. But you can also lose them as well if you fuck up on missions, or, you're just a dick. Which I love the fact that it mentions here, because I think it's often assumed that a storyteller should be doing these things to their players if they're doing something in-game that's fucking up. But no, it's very clear here that they fail at missions and they perform badly. They should be stripped at their rank. And I like it there because it just has this level of realism that I feel a lot of games companies are not bold enough to go and take, because there's just sort of that level of not wanting to be too mean or harsh to players, because the players are the sacred gods of TTRPG hood and they should be able to do anything and everything, because if they die or they get hurt, then it's the game's master as an arsehole. Like, no, it's all fair, it makes sense. And for it to be included in the book here just reinforces, again, this concept of balance. But at least now it's on a metagaming level rather than the in-game of spiritual Japanese stuff that I am not educated enough to include in this description. Chapter 4 is another easy to read chapter, and it's fairly brief as well because it's filled with the likes of weapons, ammo, and yes, this is a Talsorian game, so you are going to be tracking your ammo, drugs, poison, and other consumable tools, and the likes that would fill up an armory, as this is labelled the armory. You also have a load of Japanese focus artifacts, because of course you do, and from my immediate eye, it's not so blatantly offensive that this pasty ass white British boy is able to identify this as offensive. So, as I said earlier on, take everything with a pinch of salt, do your own research, but it looks like it's been well researched, and it's not just, oh, this is a Japanese game, we've got to have some Japanese things in here for good measure. It feels respectful, and hopefully when players use these sort of things, it feels respectful in those games as well. But the thing that I really love about this chapter is the fact that you've got disability aids, you have prosthetic limbs, you have hearing aids. I can count on my hands how many times I have seen a game include fucking hearing aids for characters to have. Isn't that sad? Isn't that pathetic? Like, you've got like visual synthesizers, which are basically just magic glasses, essentially, or sci-fi glasses. You've got wheelchairs, and of course, you've got a combat wheelchair as well, which some people don't like because they feel it trivializes a lot of things. But let's just think about things a little bit. Do you not think it'll be a lot easier for somebody to make adjustments to their wheelchair in a sci-fi or fantasy setting, rather than going through the means of having some powerful magic cast upon them, or, I don't know, paying with their money to have things fixed or repaired? And also, not everybody who is disabled wants to be fixed by your standards. There's a word for that, and it's called eugenics. I actually talked about that in a video up here, and on a much less hostile wording. Like, there are some people who have been in wheelchairs and used like other aids all of their life, and trying to think about what the world would be without those things is very weird and unusual for them to click over. And to use an example with myself that I've mentioned in that video, I'm autistic, and that's very much a neurological, a brain thing. And every so often I get asked by people, "Oh, you're autistic? I had no idea. Like, how's it like being autistic?" I don't fucking know. It's not like I slipped on a banana pill, hit my head and got the case of the tism, or these days, you know, just snorted a bit of fucking paracetamol. Jesus fucking Christ, what a fucking world we're living in right now. Haven't had my bit of fucking paracetamol here. Sorry, off topic. You know, autism isn't caused like that. I can't turn that shit off. Like, whenever I play characters or I run characters as NPCs, they're gonna have some degree of autism in there just because of how my fucking brain works, you know? And people who have been using wheelchairs all of their life can't just turn that shit off. Yeah, some people are going to make characters that are more able-bodied and don't have to worry about like living day in, day out using wheelchairs and the daily struggles that I possibly can't comprehend to the full extent to. I have lived and grown up with disabled people all my life, but I can't speak for wheelchair users because I don't use a wheelchair. So if people want to come into a game using a fucking wheelchair because they want to make a character that represents themselves, because every fucking character they see in a wheelchair is just a cute nerd who can't fucking do anything and is treated like a fucking child, let them have it. That being said, the mentioning of the combat wheelchair here and some of the bits and pieces that are mentioned in here, it's very much the stuff that Mark Thompson of the Combat Wheelchair D&D stuff, who has actually worked with our Talsorian Games with the Cyberpunk Combat Wheelchair. There's a proper name for it, and I've forgotten the name of it. I'm surprised that they're not even mentioned in the credits here, because it's very clearly taken influence from them. And I think that's just a little bit fucking cheeky, honestly. Even if they didn't work on this, that is very clearly taken from the work that they have done with the combat wheelchair, and also some of the work they've done with Cyberpunk. And I'm just a bit surprised that they don't even have a mention that with influence or taken from or whatever. Like, there's nothing mentioned on there. And I scanned through the credits just to make sure that I wasn't missing anything. It's like nothing is there. Like, you're fucked up there, I think. You can't take all the credit for that, because that's not all you are, Talsorian. Chapter 5 has us talk a bit more about the rules now, and I'm probably going to blitz through a bit more here because there's a lot of information and crunch that I don't think I should really be sharing all that much. But it starts off by like a reprinting of the how to play rules from the beginning of the first chapter, and usually I'd feel a bit annoyed about this because if you've listened to some of my reviews in the past, I've often felt that the copying and pasting of such material from one book or the other without much word change is a little lazy, but I do think it works here because at the beginning of the book you have that like friend-to-friend conversation, like saying, you know, really simple, like the support system, it's this and that, so that makes sense that you're opening up for the first time and just seeing how things work, so you'll feel comforted into playing this game, so it's just upfront about how things work and it doesn't surprise you later all in one go. But then you get to the rules section and it's all printed here. That makes sense, you know, to have all the rules stuff together so you don't just have all the rules bar the basic bar dice system at the front of the book. Like, I can make an exception to that, that's absolutely fine. Here you have a bit more of an expansion of like it's loose money management in the form of disposable income, which is all based on the character's wealth. Everything else is like really simple. You have like social interactions and infiltration and stealing with modifiers to match depending on how difficult or easy something it is. Combat again is really simple, as I mentioned already. You're trying to beat the opponent's score, and the assassinate mechanic is quite frankly brutal. It is gorgeous and it works exactly how you think an assassinate mechanic should work, which some people won't like because that may end up being on you and you may die extraordinarily quickly, potentially on a failed dice roll. But when you're dealing with a game with fucking assassins who are at the top of their game, that jump from dimension to dimension, that is to be expected, quite frankly. And if that's the sort of thing that's not going to bother you, personally, I don't think you should be playing this sort of game. But this game does take a much nicer approach to that sort of thing than I, so each to their own. You also have mechanical conditions and hazards to keep in mind as well, where a character could be afflicted with a condition such as being paralysed, which may affect movement, and an environmental hazard, which, I don't know, say if it's raining and you may not be able to hear as well or see as well, or whatever that may well be. And I don't know whether I was looking out for these at this point, but this just made me think about what Chronicles of Darkness does. It does something very similar. They give them slightly different names. I think conditions is actually the word they use for the player-inflicted one. But yeah, these White Wolf connections just kept popping up a lot, and I don't think I was trying to look for them. It's just like I was just very aware just how similar they all were, which then made me laugh when I then turned over a couple pages, and then we have Maintaining the Veil, which is essentially upholding the masquerade. Basically, don't do anything that's going to get you into trouble, otherwise like forces are going to clap back at you hard and we may not be able to save you. And there are different ways that you can raise or lower the alert level, which you probably don't want to happen depending on the scenario. However, one of the things about raising the alert level which didn't make a lot of sense to me was the exposure of weapons and having things out in the open, because pretty much all of them, bar the last one, weren't so fussy about weapons being on display. Or maybe they're just putting that as an excuse to encourage players not to go into everything guns blazing, to actually try and blend in and actually use their social skills and use violence if only when needed. And also your bunch of dimension jumping ninjas, and I'm sure in some settings your weapons are going to look a bit out of place with some of the other worlds that you're hopping from, which I'm guessing what it's going through here, but just on the surface that just didn't quite gel with me personally. There's a couple of things I want to talk about in this chapter before we move on to the next one. The first of which is the communicator tattoos, which is a really cool and albeit creepy element to the game, where each agent has a tattoo done in their ear, their tongue, and their eye. Which is horrifying in of itself, honestly. The one in the ear is the receiver that allows them to basically understand any language they're hearing, and it also allows them to communicate mentally with any member of the strike team, providing they're in the same world. The projector, which is the one on the tongue, allows them to speak any language to match the one that they're in. It also allows them to speak into the minds of their fellow strike team. And then you have the recorder, which is the one on the eye, which is the one that the handler has the most usage with, because they're able to see and record what you see in here. Now, as a horror fan, there is a lot of potential to have stories around those three by themselves, because you cannot turn them off unless you remove them. So if you want to get rid of the recorder, you've got to pluck your eye out. The projector, cut your tongue out. Receiver, cut your ear off. I love that in of itself, and the illustrations are really cool as well, a very modern, shony, sort of cheeky, shall I say, anime style, with the eye and the projector one particularly, done by a Dolan Pondsmith. I don't know what relation they have to the Pondsmith family / empire, as it were. But it's all really beautifully illustrated, and I just love the potential that those three have for consensual abuse in the table as well. As I said, there are many different ideas that you could have with something like that, like an abusive handler or a team that don't trust the group, or maybe the agency is planning something nefarious and they're just using these strike teams like puppets or something grander, or maybe they have an infiltrator yokai that's taking advantage of something. This just off of the tip of my mouth here, there's just so many cool things you could do with those as well. I can't wait to play this game just for those elements alone. Okay, cool, so Lore by Night is going to be torturing all of his players in his games of Shadow Scar. At least I'll have some safety and sanctuary when I'm dead, right? Wrong, because when you die, you become a spirit, and you're only properly dead when your ki drops down to 0, and you're able to help out a little bit as a spirit. So, again, I can't help but think about Wraith the Oblivion here, but I know that's not the intention. Spirits and passing on and ghost stories in Japan is a lot more prevalent than they are into the West, and I'm saying that as somebody who enjoys a lot of Japanese horror. Again, I'm not the biggest expert on all that thing, but I know enough about it to know that's actually a very significant part of its culture. Japanese culture, I should say. And it also adds an element of risk to the game as well, because you don't just die once, you could die twice, and then poof. you're gone, mate, innit? And then the most complicated ruling system we have seen thus far is about the whole rift jumping and being able to travel from one world to the next, and how you may end up getting stuck somewhere, which honestly feels like a worse version of the net running rules from Cyberpunk Red. I don't know if that was the intention. Obviously, I don't think they want to make something that's like intentionally worse, but I mean, like, was it meant to be similar to the net running, or was it just something that I've just read into it? I.e., it doesn't feel that engaging that you just make a series of rolls and you're just like moving down the chain, and you fuck up, then you fuck up, basically. I hoped it would have been a bit more involved than that, but at the same time, despite being like a chained or an extended roll, you know, just to make another White Wolf comparison here, it does make things fairly simple to understand, and it does make things a bit easier for the storyteller to plan and organise. If they're expecting a group to jump, that they can have like descriptions and visual things to lean into as they're rift jumping. Chapter 6 is called World Lore, and as one would assume from the title, it is a very beefy chapter, and also one that I feel is actually a little dry and overwhelming in places, especially if you did what I did and tried to read it all in one fucking sitting. It starts off talking about the Shadow Scar and their origins. As I said earlier on, it gives a much fuller explanation, like breaking down where they come from, what they're doing, when the different like clans came into being, and it ends with like a specific date where nothing happens, which I'm not too sure whether that was intentional and there's supposed to be some information there, or this is the default starting year for your groups and it's just left like that for you to just go and decide what happens, which, if that was the intention, is pretty cool. If it was the former, that's not so cool. But again, this is a beta review copy, so take those sort of criticisms with a pinch of salt. It talks about the different departments within the agency. The default one for players is the operations. You have administration, medical, belief, not faith, there is a difference, and support with a HQ layout, and all of these are expanded in fuller detail with different sub-factions and groups, which makes it a beautiful minefield for games masters, because you have all these tools to play with, but then you get overwhelmed by choice. It's like the Lord gives it with one hand and the Lord takes it with the other. There's a further explanation on the concept of the mosaic and the clans. The mosaic is a collection of worlds connected together by strands, and there's a lovely bit of artwork. Well, it's more of a diagram, actually. A very nice little diagram that connects all of that. This is where we get the, I feel, cringe on comparison to the multiverses, but I understand why you use that to connect people to the idea, but but it is explained in the more in-game world and using its terminologies. You have the Utsushiu, which is the material realm, and the Kakaryu, which is the spirit realm, and then you have the information on the four major worlds, and there is a lot of info because, as I've alluded to earlier on, they occupy different spaces of the real world. Like the Victorian London one occupies bits of England and Europe, and there is a lot. It's very clear that this is a passion project for Cody, and honestly, I am glad that there is so much information. Quite frankly, they could have made a whole fucking source book just on this information alone, because it's like 100 or so pages. It makes up the vast majority of the book, I feel. At least that's what it felt like. However, it does create the issue that when you're reading this, like, logically, that it creates the awful fear that you have to know all this information to play the game, and I feel that it feels more so with the information that's on the clans, and they are broken up with their different factions and their symbols and all the rest of it, that you need to know all these bits of information to do this, to understand their culture, to properly roleplay them, and to treat this very semi-serious setting, serious in terms of its presentation of the cultural and society and faith and all the rest of it, so you don't unintentionally culturally appropriate things. But it's just a lot to ask of players who just want to play ninjas that jump between one realm to the other. As I said, I am ultimately glad that they have gone into so much information, and it's a lot to read, and it's very dry, and it's just a lot to consume. So I won't lie, I ended up skim reading bits of it because I don't think it was worthwhile me having all those bits of information to regurgitate back to you, because I don't think I'm allowed to do that, and even if I was, I wouldn't have done so anyway, because I could just do a fucking lore dive on that, and I can actually see like channels popping up on YouTube or TikTok talking about like different snippets of lore regarding Shadow Sky, and I hope that we do, because when you have like these huge fucking ass waffly bits of text talking about real world history, blending it with this fictional one that's very political, that's very racially charged, that's very clearly presenting a certain message that I don't think the right-leaning are going to appreciate anymore much, but quite frankly, you can all go fuck yourselves. Like, having people out there to break that sort of information down is nice, but it shouldn't be ultimately needed to make something more accessible, which is a huge flaw with my legacy as a YouTuber, like talking about Vampire the Masquerade lore, because it's also confusing and convoluted that it becomes a fucking mindful to play, because so often I have seen, like, oh, I need to have all these different books to play the games. Like, no, you don't. All the information there is the core book, and, like, people put up this fearful brick wall. So, yeah, it's, again, the Lord taketh with one hand and the Lord giveth away the other one, and I'm not really too sure the best way that could have been presented in this book, honestly. They could have presented part of the information, and they do say that there are other realms out there that they have yet to explore, and that's probably going to be more source books further down the line, which is dependent on how well the Kickstarter does and the general interest for this, so go and check out those links in the description below if any of this sounds remotely interesting to you. But then you might have had the issue where, oh, it'd be nice if there was just more to work with, you know. Like, I don't think there was an easy fix here, and this may well be, like, the only book that they print with this if it does really badly, so I think it's ultimately the best thing that all this information is in there, because, you know, rather too much than too little, it's much easier to skin the fat than to pump the meat into something, you know? There are 3 chapters left in this book, but I'm going to be spending the rest of this review mainly focusing on Chapter 7, The Storyteller's Guide. Another White Wolf reference. Why am I doing this? Well, Chapter 8 is the best area, which is very clearly formatted. It's easy to read and understand what means what. I love the artwork and the research that's gone into this. I think it's really funny that the little character portraits that they've done looks like a fucking 90s video games character select screen. I don't know if that was intentional, but I would not be surprised if that was very much the direction that they were going for with that. And it's also cool that you've got, like, some regular grunt enemies in, and like a street punk and a police officer, because we all have to beat the shit out of cops these days. It's often easy to get lost within the crowd of monsters and whatnot, and you just want some, like, ordinary enemies to throw in, then you just don't know how weak or strong they should be. So it's nice to have those included in here and not relying too much on the games master to homebrew something that may or may not work. And Chapter 9 is an adventure. Now, whilst I have read it, I'm not going to be talking about that at all in this review, because I don't think it's particularly fair or all that logical to be talking about an adventure for a game that technically isn't even out yet and just spoiling things, you know? I don't see what anybody is going to be gaining out of that, so I could talk about it in a later review, but I don't tend to do that sort of thing, so that's going to be down to you for when this game comes out to go and read out the review and make your own decisions. But I do like the fact that an adventure has been included in here, just because you've been given so much fucking information in this book. And with any core book, when you're reading a new game, you have all these different ideas about what could work, what you could do, all the different ideas, you know, in my case, the communicator tools, but you're not quite too sure how to put all of that together in a sensible adventure, like something that would make sense and, like, keeps in line with the game's themes and motions. But hey, you've now got an adventure, which is a great leaping off point that you can then carry on into further adventures depending on how well your players do or don't. So that's all amazing shit. Now, for Chapter 7, The Storyteller's Guide, I really like this chapter just on the fact that it actually feels like it's written by a person who actually runs and plays games, which isn't to say that other chapters of this nature don't, because they clearly are. They're done by people with a lot of experience and playtesting and a huge passion for games, but this actually feels like somebody who is actively playing and running games now, and it feels like someone who's been really helpful and friendly, that more conversational style that I mentioned earlier on, offloading their experience in a friendly manner on a forum post or Discord. And honestly, bits of this feels like I'm reading like someone's script for a YouTube video. Like, this could easily be like half of the TTRPG fucking content out there. But one thing it does very differently that a lot of people don't tend to talk about, it talks about the benefits of railroading as well as the negatives, which is something that I've only seen twice. I've done it once, which has been in a video up there somewhere now, and I know that Ginny D did a video of this not too long ago as well, like a year or so ago. And if you don't know what railroading is, it's the idea that you have your players going down like this single line track, like a railroad, where they have to go from point A to point B to point B to complete the adventure. There's not much variety. It doesn't allow them to express themselves and explore, etc. and so forth. But there are times where you want to railroad your players even just a little bit, just to guide them along, sort of thing. And I really like the fact that this chapter highlights that. And it's not really something that a lot of games actually talk about. They just say, you don't want to railroad things, it's bad, do this instead. But no, actually, there's some positives to be made here, and I'm As I said, I'm really glad that it does do that. It just breaks the mould a little bit. It feels fresh, it feels current, and it's generally good advice. You also have advice about running spy thrillers and integrating that with the concept of the mosaic, which is really nice because spy thrillers in and of themselves are really convoluted creatures. Yeah, it's not just like getting from point A to B with drama and action. There's plot twists, there's romance, there's political fuckery, and with something like this, there's a load of like racial and political shit to be dealing with as well. But then you've got to throw in this idea that you've got a whole fucking multiverse or multiverses of ideas and cultures, people, and all the rest of it, and additional research you have to do. So combining those two ideas is pretty messy to deal with, and whilst I don't think it's done a particularly good job of integrating the two together, I do think for a lot of people it's going to add a bit of comfort knowing that it's going to be difficult. There are ways of doing that, it's just they haven't touched most of that here, and I feel that's going to be something that's going to be explored in future books depending on how well they do during the Kickstarter. Go and check out those links in the description below. You also have some information regarding an antagonistic group of agents, and they're antagonistic because they're not really part of the Shadow Scar agency. Actually, they're not part of it at all. That's their whole thing. They've detached themselves from it, and they've plucked out an eye so they can't be watched, and I think they've done other things as well so they can't be heard as well, and they are the Hollow Eye Syndicate, which is a very interesting antagonist. They're basically all for themselves, like, you have what you have, we'll teach you what we need to teach you, but there's not really much of a union going on with there, which I love. You know, they're just trying to look after themselves the best that they can. It's very cutthroat, and to me they feel very sympathetic, or at least they have the potential of being presented as a sympathetic antagonist, which on the one hand is cool because it gives them players to, you know, to engage with them and like have characters that are connected to them, or other agents that like fight against each other. There's some great role-playing opportunity there, but I feel it could also like lessen the severity of what they can do, because they have all the same tricks that you can do, but if they start becoming sympathetic, players may not want to hurt them as much. And I mean, there's even a sidebar that gives you the options to play them, and I would not be surprised if there's a sourcebook further down the line that expands all of this out, that really encourages players to embrace them. They don't seem too horrific, they're just clearly upset, pissed off with the state of affairs, which interests a lot of interesting political intrigue to the whole game, you know, being seen and heard and all the rest of it. I'm quite curious to see what the agency has planned other than just keeping the peace, because if you think about it, it's very totalitarian, if that's how the word's pronounced. There's a little bit about the yokai, which are sort of like these demonic spirits that I've alluded to a lot of times before, a word that I've completely forgotten for the most part, but I'm very glad that I've mentioned here, right at the end of my fucking notes. It mentions that the fact that they have feelings, that they're controlled, that they're not just mindless goons that you can just go and slash about in a dungeon crawl sort of thing, which again opens up role-playing opportunities, because each one's going to want certain different things. This is touched a bit more on the bestiary, and it provides a wonderful opportunity for a games master just to flex their vocal muscles and to provide stupid voices for everyone, which is always a load of fun for any sort of game environment. But one of the weirdest things in this chapter is that it unpacks the mysteries of the mosaic and how it all connects together. And whilst there's some tables that you can roll upon, like unpack like the sights and smells and the things that you see, like it's sort of presented as this weird mystery that no one really knows what's going on. And Cody Pondsmith, as himself, like states quite clearly, like, this is what happened, read at your own caution. Which I feel a bit bizarre, because I feel that's the sort of thing that you would include in like an optional source book that was to tell things in fuller information, rather than the core book that players are obviously going to read and then come into the game with some level of meta gaming. I'm not quite too sure what the decision was. It felt very weak, and I personally would have much preferred it was very vague, like scholars have described it as this has been described as that, and then you have these tables to work with, because of course the mosaic has got all these different multiverses together, so you could use these tables multiple times to come up with your own iteration of things. But to describe flat out what's going on is just as confusing as it is odd. What's also odd is that you actually have a much fuller building mission set of tables, which should have been within the same chapter as running the game, or maybe it could have been highlighted a bit more at the beginning of the book, where you're talking about generating the first mission and the handle and all the life path stuff. Like to reference it, you know, to generate the first mission you can do, go and see such and such. I wasn't aware of that the first time round, and I think the placement of that right at the back might have been a bit weird, but I can understand it being in here because this is like a storytelling chapter and that makes sense for it to be there. I just think it could have been better placed, particularly if you're coming into this from the solo player mind, but all subjective bias stuff, I guess. Another weird placement I find is like the generation of homeworld and like how you go about doing that, how to come up with homeland abilities and like coming up with different like gears and tools that are better suits that environment, which is great because it allows the games master to really customize things and make things their own. But I do think that would have been better suited at the front of the chapter or towards the front when you're talking about like running and preparing the game rather than after a bunch of tables. So that could have been like the other way around, I think. So the tables could have gone at the back of the chapter and that one could have gone at the front of the chapter. And I do also think it's funny that the example case study that they give is Cyberpunk Red and Night City, because of course they were going to include that one in here somehow. There's a weird disconnect that I found with that, honestly, that sort of like it took me out of the world of Shadowscar, relying a bit too heavily on some of the meat and potatoes of the life path system and the formatting and everything else. And now you've got this bit about, technically speaking, Night City and the Cyberpunk Red world is canon to Shadowscar, but I suppose any fucking world is when you're dealing with multiverses. Like, it's cool, but it's fun, and there's a very interesting way to get the Cyberpunk players involved with your new game. But it just feels a wee bit forced, for my own preferences at least. Shadowscar really is a well-loved passion project with the Pondsmith family and Talsorian Games. A lot of love and labour has gone into the research and the presentation of the material and also the book of itself. So it's easy and accessible to get into, both with its rule set, its artwork, the written material, and it's well respected with its research to try and healthily portray the cultures and the traditions that a lot of it is really fueling the entire experience, even if at times I feel the whole sci-fi cyberpunk aesthetic is like rubbing it unnecessarily. Like, I feel if this went in a far more fantasy sort of direction, that could make a lot more sense here, but I understand why the Pondsmiths are obsessed with technology and wanted to integrate that in somehow. It works, but I feel that at times, particularly with that example case study, where it just feels a bit fucking ham-fisted. And the game, as I said, looks really easy to play and get into, and I would absolutely love to run this sometime and be a player of this and come up with some really cool stories. It's just the one major issue that I have with it at the moment, and that's more to do with the circumstance in which that I've engaged with the material thus far, is that this is a PDF only, and because of the relationship that I have at the moment that's been established, is that I can't really show or tell anyone about it. So yeah, I could use the quick start rules and come up with something with that, but I don't typically like running a game with quick starters. I'd much rather have the full game and experience with character sheets and all the rest of it, so I can give my players the full package and the experience. And I would just love to show you some of the artwork and some of the writing in here, but I can't do that at the moment. And I kind of feel that I've done this review in game a disservice, because I haven't run it or I played it. I can only go from what I've read, and it's one thing to see how well a game runs just from reading it, than seeing how well it runs by actually applying that knowledge and like adapting and playing things as you go along. So I will probably do a follow-up review in the form of how to run Shadowscar video, because I don't really want to sit through and do another... I don't even know how fucking long this video is going to be, but I've been recording this for nearly 3 hours now, so it's going to be a fucking long-ass chore to edit down to, I don't know. That's probably where I take the review next. Like actually running it for you lot, which if you're really looking forward to, let me know down in the comments below. And of course, anything that I've mentioned that I may disappear by the time the core book comes out, because again, this is a beta review copy and all this stuff is entitled to be changed, which is absolutely fine. That being said, I am exceptionally grateful that Talsorian, which are basically TTRPG royalty, giving me a review copy to their latest game to talk about. I feel truly grateful for that, and I hope that we can have more opportunities like that in the future. And again, I'm just really grateful and thankful for you for sending the copy out, and whatever cyberpunk stuff is coming my way, which I will talk about in a future video. To which I leave the video to you lot now. I would love to hear what you think about Shadowscar so far. If you've come to this video sometime in the future, like jumping through a rift from a multiverse or whatever, and Shadowscar is already out, let me know your thoughts and opinions about how it plays and runs in the comments below. Or if you've played with the Quickstarter rules and see what that feels like as well. Don't forget to check out the Kickstarter in the description as well, and their website, and the Quickstarter rules. And there's something else as well. Oh yes, there's an adventure that you can play around with as well, which is all available on Dry RPG. Now, if you purchase those themes from RPG, not the Kickstarter, with the respective links I've put down there, those are affiliate links, and that allows me to get a little bit of money that way, so I'm able to provide more awesome content like this. I'm going to be supporting them more through this because this seems like a really cool setting, and I would just love to explore a lot more in video format and private home games as well. And any financial support you can yeet my way will be greatly appreciated. But if you've got those things already and want to support me financially the same, as well as supporting Talsorian down with the stuff down below, you can copy and paste the magical affiliate code from the description into the URL or whatever it is that you're purchasing, and that helps all the same, which is amazing because you get books and shit, I get books and shit, and you get free shit for free, which is amazing because it's free and you also are the winner in this relationship here because the math's in your favour here. But if you can't do any of that or even can't support the Kickstarter for financial reasons, that's absolutely fine. Times are hard on all of us at the moment, and with increasing regularity we are seeing TTRPGs turning to crowdfunding to generate TTRPGs, which is sad, and the things are more expensive, etc. and so forth. Technically they should be even more expensive, but I know this hobby, is as fun as it is, can be really fucking expensive, so I'm not going to hold it against you if you're not able to do any of this, and I'm sure that our Talsorian Games won't be able to either. So if you can, that's absolutely great, but if you can't, that's absolutely fine. But what you should definitely do regardless is give the video a little cheeky little thumbs up, subscribe to the Lore by Night channel and our Talsorian Games channel actually, because they do a lot of really helpful tutorial guides with short form and YouTube video format on their own channel as well. And share this video with any and everyone who loves what I do, who should learn more about Shadowscar, and I'll see you on the next upload, wherever that may well be for you. And until next time, farewell.